Welcome everybody to episode 3 of the Leadership Council, where we talk all things leadership. Now listen, today I'm super excited. We have a really special guest, somebody I've been following for a while, somebody who's doing great things, somebody that I aspire to be more like. So I'm happy he's on. Christian White, the one day at a time dad. How you doing today, sir?
Excellent. I appreciate this opportunity.
No problem, man. Listen, I've been looking to chop it up with you for a while, but our schedule is always kind of, be opposite and everything. But, like I told you offline, my podcast is all about leadership. And to me, there's no more important leadership than community leadership. And, your story really inspires me. Every time I see what you do, I'm like, listen, he doesn't talk about it. He does it. And I want to be more like him. So I thought it was important to have you on, my podcast so you can tell people about your story and what you've been doing. So, I got some questions for you. We'll chop it up and we'll see where it leads. So, man, you have a real interesting story. You kind of had some struggles in the past that led you into some trouble, but you let those experiences make you become a guide for others. So kind of take me along that journey of how it led you to here.
So let me reframe that a little bit. So my experiences have taken me to all sorts of corners.
Yes.
So
yes.
Now is more of the developed product.
Yep.
The reinterpreting of a lot of those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, let's be clear, there were many, many years, we're talking decades, where I used those experiences to be the best in that environment that I grew up in. So, what I will say is, I do believe fundamentally we can change, but our natural dispositions don't change much. I believe that we
Absolutely.
can learn to expend our energy in different ways, which is what I'm learning to do. Like I tell people, so a few years ago, I did a poster campaign in Boston, Chelsea, Lynn, Lawrence, Springfield.
I remember that.
Different cities where I were hanging up posters saying, if you go to jail, will the gang raise your child? I did it all on my own dime, in my own time. That takes a level of dedication.
100%.
Same dedication would be no different if I was still in the streets trying to hunt you down. It's the same exact energy. Now it's just in a way a lot differently.
Yeah, you're right. It's gonna sound crazy. Some of the best businessmen were ex-drug dealers,
mm-hmm.
right, or ex-criminals, because it's that dedication, that focus that it takes to even be a drug dealer, right? That you can bring to a legit business, right? And so you're right.
What talking about is transferable skills. The people who became really successful were successful in taking those skills and transferring them and updating them to the current role. Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is absolutely right, man. Like you didn't absolutely change who you are. You just changed your focus.
Absolutely.
And this is the product. This is the product that we see. So let's go into that a little bit. So tell the viewers a little bit about your story, a little bit about your background, mm-hmm. and what you're doing now.
So my name's Christian White. I'm 43 years old. I grew up primarily in the Humboldt Ave Grove Hall section of Roxbury. For many, many years. I moved around there when I was 13. Just prior to that, my dad sat me down, told me flat out he couldn't afford me anymore. So I had to leave. So I was given two options. I could move in with my Uncle Ray and Aunt Gloria, who lived on Wambach, which meets Humboldt Ave, or I could move in with my biological mom, who I had just met for the first time a month before that. So in my mind, I'm going to move to Boston. I'm already in Massachusetts. The T's right there. I can always go to somebody I know, all that stuff. So right before that, so 12 to 13 was probably the greatest shift ever in my life. So with all the trauma that I had experienced, I wasn't really good at keeping exact times. So the way that I kept time was when something major abnormal happened outside of the regular abnormal.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, from about the ages of 3 to about the ages of 12 and a half, I was molested about 5 nights a week. That went on for the better part of 10 years. And at 12 and a half is when so right before my dad told me he couldn't afford me anymore, my abuser told me that we couldn't do what we were doing for our whole lives anymore, that I needed to be normal now.
Yep.
So I'm already filled with rage, pain, hate, resentment towards myself, resentment towards anybody who's supposed to be a trusted figure in my life. So, I was very much closed off as a child, very much closed off. And what ended up happening is once I moved in with my uncle and aunt, so they were given, back in the days, it was called DSS, Department of Social Services. Now it's called DC.
Yep.
Now it's a CRA. Back when I was a child, it was called a CHINS, a child in need of services.
Okay.
So this is what was filed on me, and it gave permission for my uncle and aunt to take me for, it was like a 6-month custody. So during the 6 months, and both of them are pastors. They were healthy. They had resources, and they wanted to share all of that with me. But by 13, forget 13, by 6 or 7, my mind was already so far gone. I can use words like PTSD, complex PTSD, anxiety. I know these words now. But when I didn't have the faculties to understand these things, I was still experiencing the symptoms.
Yep.
When my uncle and aunt tried to show me this healthy love, I knew that in order to accept it, I would have to be vulnerable. And vulnerable was just not something that I was capable of doing at 13. So by the end of the 6 months, we went back to court. My dad was there, my uncle and aunt, and I told the judge that I wanted to be placed in foster care because I understood that at least in foster care, and this was through tellings from my friends, at least I would get to experience some of the dysfunction, the abnormal. By this time, I was so groomed into a victim that I needed to be victimized. So I would actively put myself in situations to be victimized. So
because it was the norm.
It was the norm. I needed that.
Yep.
And so, just traveling forward a little bit, by now I'm in residential care, residential facilities, foster homes. Eventually it becomes DYS. Now I'm hanging out on Humboldt Ave. And so, got involved with everything you could imagine in the street, from drugs to guns. At 17, I was arrested for a murder case. While I was waiting for trial, I picked up an assault on a CO. I was found not guilty 19 months later, bailed out on the CO case, went home. I was back in Nashua Street 2 months later for another gun. And that would be the process until I was 27, when I went to prison the last and final time, when my son's mom was 8.5 months pregnant, and I was going in for 10 years.
That's tough, man, because now you're facing two different situations, right? You're facing the joy of having a kid, right? And all the responsibilities come with that. But now you're not going to be around for 10 years, right?
Well,
so how did you...
Part of it is I was running from that responsibility.
Okay.
In a major way, something that I had always loved about prisons or institutions was structure. I worked much better under structure. And so there was so much unpredictability in my life at that time that prison seemed like the safest place to be. I knew how to conduct myself. I knew the routine. You can plan out 5 years, 10 years, barring something major happen. You can dictate how your daily flow goes. And I needed that because inside I was always so unpredictable.
Yeah. No, people like the outside looking in, they think that would sound crazy, but it's not. It's not. I know people that have been in the military for years, right? And they can't wait to get out. But as soon as they get out, they don't know what to do with themselves because they need that structure.
Absolutely.
And I know people that's been locked up. Every year they get locked up. It's like clockwork, right? Like every year at the same time they get locked up because they need that structure. So I could definitely see that. I think for the average listener, they probably like, wow, that sounds crazy. But no, it's what you're used to. Like you said, you know the rules in there. You know the routine. You probably know the people in there by now. So it's almost like home at that point, and everything else is kind of scary. So let me ask you, did you end up doing the full 10 years?
I did almost 9 years, 8.9 years.
Okay. So bring me to that point where you got to actually hold your son, right? Like you got out, you got to see them. I know it had to be a period where it was kind of like you guys are filling each other out, right? Because you've been gone, right? He's been out there without you. So how was that moment when you got to kind of embrace him?
So just for the record, I saw him once when he was 10 days old, once when he was 14 days old, and then twice when he was 2 years old. And then I wouldn't see him again till he was turning 9. So I did see them couple of times.
Yep.
But in terms of bonding and emotional, those visits meant nothing because there was just so much space in between. So when I came home, I went to a step-down program, the Brook House. I don't know if it exists anymore.
Wow.
I went to a step-down program where I'm in the community, finishing the sentence. I can get a job. I could go to school. I could go to my own doctor's appointments, things like that. And so the first time I saw him again was his mother brought him to the program. And so, and you know, I for many years, I was really bitter that I missed all those years and didn't get to see him, and somebody should have brought him. Then I had to realize I made the decision to abandon both of them. That was my choice. I need to. So
yeah, that seems hard.
Oh yeah,
that seems like hard realization.
Is the only reason why I can show up for my son like I do today. So to answer your question, when I came home, I hit the ground running. I did not know what kind of dad I would be. I was still trying to figure that out. So, you know, so just so the viewers know, just to add into the equation, my son was diagnosed with PDD, NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So he's diagnosed with autism. And so, you know,
that's another layer of things right there. Wow.
And something that I did not, so I was having two simultaneous talks with myself about fatherhood. And then a third one came to me. And I ended up going with the third one. The first one was, well, just be what my dad was not. Yep. And then I started understanding that if I'm making parenting decisions based on or holding the thought of space for my dad and the ways he didn't do something, then that's unfair to my son. It's unfair to me. Yep. I need to be creative with this. It's not the same circumstances. It's very different. It's a different world. I'm a different person. My son's not me.
Exactly.
And so, you know, my other line of thinking was just something I definitely didn't want to do, which is, you know, I saw so many moms and dads, especially that served longer sentences. They came home and treated the household the exact way the CO treated the cell block. It was do things my way, period. It was parenting purely from a controlling aspect. And I did not want to be involved with that. That was definitely not me. So the third thing that came to mind after I dismissed those two options was don't do anything. Observe your son. He's almost 9. He's his own entity. He's going to teach you how he needs to be parented. And that's the stance that I took. So for about the first 6 months of being home, I didn't pressure him at all. I simply observed him. I didn't make judgments. I didn't make comments. I didn't say, I wouldn't do it none of that type of stuff. I wanted to know who he was prior to me instilling anything in him. And remember, unconsciously, I already instilled abandonment, trust issues, fear into him simply by not being there. And I also realized that even me being home and in his presence was a trigger for him. So I have to contend with all of this. So the best way that I figured out what to do was to let him be. That was the best thing that I did for me.
That's amazing, man. That's amazing because I grew up without a father, so I could only imagine like if my dad just showed up, right? Like it tried to change things, how it would put me through a whirlwind. So the fact that you have the patience to sit back and kind of learn him, right? And you know, that's I think more people that's going through a similar situation needs to take that advice because I see your relationship with your son and it makes me smile every time I see it. And I think the fact that you took that route made that stronger. So let me ask you, so how far from when you got released to when you started doing like the flyer campaigns and the community outreach?
So I came home 2015. In 2017. So prior to that, I'm a mental health advocate, as you know. I believe in addressing your inner work, doing the trauma work, the shadow work. I believe in that. And so I had been on the mental health journey myself since about 18.
Okay.
So I've always been a big proponent of just learning about yourself, learning how you function,
Yep.
your patterns, your triggers, all of that stuff. So I was always doing, I don't know, under the table mentoring, telling my story.
Yeah.
I've read tons of books. I know tons of strategies. So I was always sort of doing what I could one-on-one. And so
Okay.
what ended up happening is in 2017, December, I went to go pick, Christian was living in Georgia at the time.
Okay.
When I came home, he was living in Norwood. His mom moved to Georgia about a year later. So I was working in a restaurant at the time. So, once, twice a month, I would find coverage for my shift, and I would drive to Georgia, give him a hug, drive back up. And
Yeah.
so in 2017, I was picking him up for Christmas vacation. So I go down there, I pick him up, and I bring him home. And I get a text, I don't know, probably within the half hour of us being home, that simply said, "I'm really tired, keep him." And that became the beginning of the next level. So
Yeah.
what I ended up doing was I created a page. It doesn't exist anymore, but I created a page called the One Day at a Time Dad.
I remember that. Yeah.
And I mean, within like 6 months, it had like 90,000 followers. I mean, just ridiculous. I mean, so
Yeah.
because it's a dad asking for help. And the premise of the page was to elicit advice, support, knowledge just about parenting. Because I didn't know what to do at all.
Yeah.
I could show up on the weekend, take them out. That was enough to do. But it wasn't parenting at the primary level. And so
It wasn't full time.
it was not full time. And so I had to learn a lot really fast. I had to deal with the fact that my mental health was very much stunted and slowed down, because now I have to split that energy. Now I have someone here
Yeah, exactly.
who may not even want to be here, but I have to take care of them. So what I ended up doing is I thought to myself, I know what I was doing when I was my son's age. So what a lot of the things that I do, they may on some level benefit the community, but a lot of it's really selfish. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because it comes from the standpoint of the more families, the more young people that I can influence, the more protected my child's going to be when I'm not around him. That's my whole kind of thinking. So what ended up happening was, you mentioned the poster campaign. I wanted to kind of scale up what I was doing, as opposed to just the one-on-one kind of sharing my story, stuff like that. So I had linked up with dudes that I knew from the joint that were out, or just dudes that I knew from previous incarcerations. So I would go to their inner cities. They would show me exactly where to hang the posters, all of that stuff. And it started getting a lot of attention, especially in Boston. And at that time in Boston was when there were a lot of key political races going on. Now, at this point, I don't know any of the candidates, their names. I don't even know what races there are. I'm very cynical towards politics. But obviously, so the candidates are now reaching out to me. Obviously, they can see that I can probably connect them to worlds that they're not usually connected to. Maybe it'll equal some votes, whatever. So now they're all reaching out to me, asking me to campaign for them, bringing me to lunch, bringing me to dinner, all the regular crap. And so what I ended up doing was I started really paying attention to I started paying attention to the district attorney race. Because for me, that was the biggest thing, because the district attorney in the inner city is like a god. I mean, just
100%.
Just being realistic. And so, Rachel Rollins was running against 5 other candidates. I studied them all, watched them all, interviewed most of them, and then I decided to back Rachel. So now that I'm actively campaigning for her, I find myself in rooms that I typically wouldn't even want to go in. And when I went into these rooms, I started realizing these people had no clue what the ground level was like at all. All of the information was so 5th, 6th, 7th based. It was ridiculous. And so I said, maybe I'm the bridge for them. Maybe I'm the bridge for the people that I know personally. And maybe if I continuously bring these worlds together and we can all meet up in the middle and deal with whatever red tape we have in our own little worlds as why we can't come together, then maybe my son and maybe it's a larger protection then. That's how I view it.
Yep.
So that's kind of how that happened. And ever since then, that's when I had started the podcast. I started having my own community meetings. I started just showing up and showing up often.
It's what always amazed me about you, man, is like you always been willing to put yourself out there, no matter if it's about the sexual abuse or how hard it is to be a single dad. And I know you just said like the reason why you do one of the reasons why you do is to make the world that your son is in a little safer, a little better. How did you? It was that motivation enough to keep you going on those days where you like, this might be too much for me, right? Because I know we all have those days where it's like, I'm trying to do all this, right? I'm trying to make a change, but the change that I want to make, I'm not seeing right away because we know how our city is, right? Our city can look like it's getting better, then out of nowhere it goes crazy. So was your son the motivation to keep you pushing and keep you going all these years?
No, absolutely.
No?
I'm my own motivation. So, and let me be clear. In the beginning, I would absolutely have classified myself as single dad. Me and his mom, absolutely co-parent now. In a few weeks, he's going to Florida for the summer. So I have him 10 months out the year. He has him 2. So, and it's been that way for a few years. So we definitely co-parent. And we're friends now, which is even more amazing.
Awesome.
Yes. So no, what I've learned how to do is pat myself on the back in the sense that I don't always look for like major shifts.
Okay.
Just showing up is a success. Being able to engage somebody in conversation is another success. There are so many different points that we can say we were a success. And every day you're going to be more successful in other ways than some ways. That's kind of how I look at that. So even if like I don't necessarily have the energy or whatever, if I wanted to drive to 2 cities and I end up not going to any, but I ended up connected with somebody by phone or by text or whatever, then those are still successes. And I have to balance the fact that that could be something within me saying, look, maybe today's not the day you go out. Maybe today's the day you rest and actually rest. And that resting is a successful moment because it's setting you up for the energy you have tomorrow.
I think that's a major key, man. Like even in business or whatever you're doing, if you're only grading yourself on the major accomplishments, right, you're going to be burnt out, right? Those smaller steps, those smaller wins have to be celebrated.
Yes.
They have to be. But we're taught at a young age not to celebrate those, that those are just little steps towards the ultimate goal. So I think that's great advice, man. Like celebrate those, pat yourself on the back. Like if you had a great conversation with a young guy that might be going the wrong direction, but you helped them see things differently, even though it's not helping 1,000 people, you're helping that one person, right? That one person's life would be changed because of the conversation that you had.
And
so
that one person could be a problem in their neighborhood who's doing 2-3 shootings a month. So, you may very well have just slowed down that cycle without even having to touch the street yourself. That's
the
person that's on the street.
So let me ask you this. Have you got any pushback from like either the community or politicians? Like why should we listen to you because of your past?
Honestly, pushback. The only thing that I can think of as pushback is not already having a high-paying level city job where I'm working with people in reentry. Because I don't, ever since I came out, so to speak, I've literally danced to my own tune. Yeah. And that's a problem when you're in certain structures because your tune should be what you dance to on your lunch break. Any other time, you need to be dancing to ours. And I'm not good at that. So the only pushback I would say would come in the form of people not legitimately supporting me, like publicly, like making it a big deal. But I mean, like I said, the community loves it. So it doesn't, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So let me ask you, when you was in those rooms with those politicians, right? And I know from my personal life, right? I'm from, I'm from the streets. I grew up in that manner as well. So when I'm in these business meetings, sometimes I feel a vibe from the people that I'm around because I'm different. I'm other. Did you ever get that sense from the people, the politicians that you were trying to help that like, all right, we'll listen to his little story, but he doesn't really belong at the table with us?
Oh, of course. I mean, so I think the way that I navigate rooms like that is, first of all, I know that I should be in that room.
Yep.
So I always remind myself because, I suffered imposter syndrome and still do for it to very high degrees. And
Me too.
yeah.
Definitely.
And so, but what I'm coming to learn is, or what I have learned in coming to even progress even further is, one, I belong in this room. Because I remember, so I sit on several boards, and I had this experience within the boards too, where somebody will like feel the need to reinterpret what I'm saying, or
I hate that. Yeah.
It's like thank you, noble woman, for enlightening the peasants. It's like, I can talk for myself, but thank you. And so, when I'm in these rooms, I started realizing I'm way advanced. Like, I didn't even realize how advanced I was until I started listening to the crap coming out of other people's mouths. And so when I'm navigating these rooms, I do my best to try to understand their perspective. So it's like, so if I'm in a meeting with academics, which is meetings I typically find myself in a room with, a guy's telling me about how he did a 17-year study on inner city life, and this is what's needed, and I'm like, and he gets paid a certain amount and has some letters after his name. I'm like, why shouldn't I be getting paid to do the same thing when that person you were studying for 17 years, that was me. I was living.
Yeah.
That's
100%.
So I always remind them, one, I should be here. Two, I should be being paid just as much as you for even blessing you with my presence. Because, like I said, even when like politicians or a lot of these higher up meetings, even when they have a family member that went through it, a cousin, someone's on drugs, so that's not you. Like, it's like, I'll never forget, someone was like, I grew up in Boston public school. I did too. I went to Hyde Park High. Where did you go? Boston Latin. Okay, so you grew up in Boston Latin. We don't even consider that a public school. You can call it one, but your experience at Boston Latin, trying to compare it to Madison or Hyde Park or all of these other schools, it's a vastly different experience. And if that's what you need to use to connect, then that's a problem.
It's way different.
Yes. And so what I do to connect people is, so something that I have absolutely mastered is telling my personal story. And the reason why I can connect with others so well is because I'm so well adept at seeing patterns. So when I'm talking to somebody, 1, 2, 10, 20, 100 people, I identify a part of myself within all of them and then put it together and approach things from that way. And that's what I do with politicians.
That's man, it took me a while to learn that, right? Like you got to know your value. And for people that haven't been in those rooms, no matter if it's business, politics, whatever, what you'll quickly realize is you're just as smart or smarter than the people with the degrees. People that have been in those rooms for a while, right? They don't let you see that from the outside in because they want to keep you outside. But once you're in those rooms, you're like, oh, okay. I think Michelle Obama said it.
The whole point of them asking you to that room is because they're admitting you know something that they don't.
Yeah, I think Michelle Obama said it. She said, I got to those tables and realized the people at those tables are not that smart. Right? So it's like...
Also, Michelle Obama was bred for a politician's wife role. So, I mean...
Yeah, she was. So a little different.
Let's be very...
no.
Pop everything. Also, let's be...
Yeah, that's true. Oh, let me ask you this. So you work with the community. Have you ever encountered a situation where you might have been trying to work on a block you might have had beef with when you was younger,
Yeah.
or static, and how do you overcome that, right? Because there might be some animosity, even though it happened in the
Yeah.
past, right? But we know how it is.
So I'll give you a perfect example. So last year, so I grew up in an area called Humboldt Ave, historically known to have beef with very specific neighborhoods. And last year, I did a fatherhood event in a project that was actively still going at it with my old neighborhood. And so I was a therapeutic mentor for about a year. So I mentored young people from my neighborhood. I mean, literally from almost every neighborhood. My biggest point of pride, and a part of it is because I went away for so long, is that I became 100% neutral. 100% neutral. And everybody knows that I'm 100% neutral. So the young kids around my neighborhood, they can tell me all sorts of things they're about to do. When I go to another neighborhood, they know I'm not going to say it. Those kids will tell me they're about to go through all types of stuff. So it's like I'm a big harm reductionist because I believe there's a level of reality that you're never just going to strip away the lust for anything. Anything.
Yeah.
So there has to be a lessening of it. So I try to be that. I try to be one of those lessening people for them. So, I mean, for me, I always understand that as many people as can see me as positive is just as many people that could remember me for being negative. There's no
100%.
doubt about that. So I always...
Have you ever got pressed? Have you ever got pressed by somebody like that remembered you from those days and try to bring that back up for you while you're trying to do something positive? That's amazing.
Never. Not one time. Not one time.
That's because that would be my thinking, like, you know, and I think it's a thing that fear stops a lot of people from doing amazing things. Like, I would think, like, I know my past, right? But I also understand I'm not my past, but other people might not see that and try to press me.
And that's how it's, so I'll never forget when I first started doing the work, a group of the two groups of young people from different neighborhoods that were actually warring with each other came up to me and they were like, big homie, we know you're going to be going over here tomorrow to hang up your posters. Do you want us to be in a separate car watching you? Like, no, I appreciate that love for you what I'm doing. But that would be counterproductive. And then I explained why that would be counterproductive. So, you know, it's like, and you have to operate from a standpoint of, I know something could possibly happen, but I'm not going to let that deter me.
That's what true leadership is, man. Putting your self-interest aside, right, to help others. And you know, I've seen you do that. So what advice would you give somebody that is looking to start doing this? Be
brave enough to fail at something new. You gotta be. So it's like, you know, I have young people that come up to me all the time. If you're doing a talk again, can I be on the panel? And it's like they're ready to be mentors in their own neighborhoods. And I'm like, that's one level. But when you're talking about the universal level, you can't do mentoring if you still wear gang affiliation stuff. You can't do mentoring if you're still very specific about being from somewhere. You can't mentor if you still put up posts saying dudes is acting gay. And it's like, there's levels of acceptance you have to reach universally. And there's levels of doing away with things that you have to reach universally. First and foremost, any affiliation. And that's affiliation directly tied to a gang, crew, whatever. I'm not saying, I mean, you grew up in your neighborhood your whole life. You're never going to dissociate from that. So that's just the reality. Those are your roots. And roots are important. But in terms of the full-fledged, ready for the world kind of talk that they're giving, it's like, well, let's talk about some of the things you have going on right now. You know, they're willing to mentor their brother, but if it's the brother of somebody that their family member just shot or something, they're not as willing to mentor them. And it's like, no, you got to be willing to do all of this. And a big part of it is, where are you at with your pride, your ego? Because these are huge factors. because so much doesn't get done or does get done because of them.
Yeah, it's tough, man. Like I said, I'm from the project, so it took me a while to kind of like completely strip myself from those affiliations, right? And because, like you said, you can change all you want, but your roots are your roots, right? So what I'm hearing from you is to really be a mentor and help people. You have to put your pride to the side a little bit. You have to almost kind of be reborn into the vision of that you're trying to help create, right? Like be neutral, really try to help everyone, not just your brother, not just your neighbor, but everyone, because that's how you truly make a change, is to help everyone around you. So let me ask you this: in that same vein, have you ever thought about venturing out to other cities and doing it?
Well, I mean, I do go. Do you mean other major cities?
Other states, other major states and cities,
Yeah.
like a New York, like
So I
that.
did do a small poster campaign in the Bronx. I haven't ventured far yet. But even with and what's interesting enough is, I'm currently working on certain projects that don't have anything to do with mentoring. They're actually home visiting initiatives and reviewing people's materials who want to go into mentoring. So I'm learning that to change the world one-on-one is a hard thing to do. So what I've been trying to do is find my ways to get into rooms that are the providers of the materials and the advertisements. I want to get a piece of that. And that's what I've been positioning myself for most recently.
All right, so let me ask you this. I see on your page, you and you also sent it to me. You're part of a organization called Essential for Childhood. Tell me about that.
So I've been on their board for about 3 years now. I sit on the leadership team, the racial equity team, the community connection team, and the co-chairs team. And EFC was a grant that was given out by the CDC to the Department of Public Health in Mass, or the equivalent of the Department of Public Health in the 7 other states that received the grant. So it's funded through CDC and it goes through DPH, Department of Public Health. So I've been on the board for about 3 years now. And the mission statement is for the safe, stable, nurturing environments for children and families. And what's interesting enough is, so through this board, we created what's called a community governance board. And I was the lead recruiter. I was the only recruiter. And I recruited 8 people throughout Mass to sit on this governance board. And what this governance board is so significant and different than most boards is, it's not an advisory board, because most times advisory boards are simply not listened to. And so what this board does is, within grant parameters, they will decide where we as the EFC go. It's a paid board. Everyone gets paid for their pre-time leading up to the meetings, their debriefs, email review, everything. They get paid the same amount that I do. So that was a big piece for me. Not being told how to do the recruitment process was a big piece for me. And mind you, my whole board goes about me being in prison, everything. What I love about the EFC is, my colleague Jenny always says it this way, but the white body people, no matter what they identify as, consistently have their own affinity groups to talk about white fragility, how racism is impacting
I think we might be having some technical difficulties. I can't really hear you.
So
I know you're still there,
but a lot of work going around.
All right, so we're back. We had some technical difficulties, but things happen. So, Kristen, so you're talking about, the amazing program that you're part of. Tell people how they can get involved with it.
So one of the interesting things is, if they wanted to be involved with Essentials for Childhood, they would have to be approved by the governance board. That's another power that they have. So it's actually really beautiful. But I would also suggest Essentials for Massachusetts. Look it up. You can find me on Facebook. My name's Christian White. You can reach out. I'm more than willing to talk about the program and the opportunities. So, they can reach out to me directly.
Okay, awesome. So, all right, before I let you go, what are you working on now? Besides that, where can they see you? What can they expect from you?
So one of the beautiful things I just did, and so after this, so what Essential does is quarterly, we give out a reward to somebody in the community that is upholding our mission statement without that being their profession to do so.
Okay.
So we recognize the really good organization called Feed the Hood. Every Sunday, this group goes out. A brother named Darrell, brother named Tariq, and this sister Brendy. Every week, and a few others. They're all part of a team. Every Sunday, they go out to different housing projects, different neighborhoods, and pass out food and information on anything. They hold constant events about expungement, resumes. I mean, so many different things. So after this,
that's amazing.
I get to go meet them on their route and give them their award. Like, this is the type of stuff I love to do. In terms of things that I'm working on right now, it's a lot of consulting. It's a lot of racial equity work, trying to bring, like I said, all the sides towards the center and getting through whatever red tape each of those worlds come with, because every world comes with red tape.
Yep, that's awesome, man. I want to give you your flowers, man. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
For doing what you do, man. It motivates me to do more. So continue to do what you do. If you ever need me for a program or anything, do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be right with you. So everybody, Kristen White, the One Day at a Time Dad. Thank you for coming, my brother. Continue doing what you do.
My pleasure. Have a great day.